Hello, my name is Thomas Schneider and today is the 1st of February 2023. I'm tidying up some old college notes here and stumbled across an essay I wrote a few years back and submitted on the 19th of September 2020. It's about the Japanese ie system, and I asked the question, is it a guarantor of cultural knowledge transfer? I prefaced the essay with a random quote, I guess, from a song that I heard a lot after completing my first cycle studies. And I heard this in Indonesia on the bus. It went, "I wonder how, I wonder why. Yesterday you told me about the blue, blue sky. And all that I can see is just a yellow lemon tree." Okay, into the essay. This essay considers the question, is the ie system a guarantor of cultural knowledge transfer? By knowledge, we mean facts, theories and rules that are assumed valid and considered true by persons or groups. The word guarantor should not be confused with the word guarantee. In this context, the word signifies an institution or legal practice that secures a social goal for and through a group. A guarantee or warranty requires a legal person and is usually of limited duration. What do we mean by cultural knowledge? The combination of the two words suggests that knowledge and culture are not one and the same, that the speaker distinguishes different kinds of knowledge. Titzman refers to knowledge as cultural when it is not the knowledge of individuals, but of groups. I quote, "We shall term culture that spatial temporal system whose thought and speech practices in a certain space and at a certain time exhibit a relative consistency in their fundamental premises." Hence, what is referred to in literature studies as a period would be a culture in this sense. Unquote. In the essay, we wish to verify whether for a group of humans, a civilization settled in the territory of the Japanese Isles, the ie has proven itself capable as a system to survive across periods or eras. Social scientists struggle to define culture. For a Japanologist, this becomes evident, for example, in the debate on the correct translation and meaning of the word bunka, culture. Waldenfels interprets the corresponding kanji, symbols of the Han people, literally, i.e. Chinese characters, in this context as intellectuality, bun, and dynamic process, ka. By intellectuality, he means creative capacity, the capability of humans to express their thoughts. I quote, "All that is governed by rules and laws and leads to beauty in art and science. An educated human is a bunjin. Bungaku is the study of literature." Unquote. The discipline of social studies proved, starting from the study of contemporary British society, that defining the culture of a people or a nation is not straightforward. Society splits along lines of race, class, sex, gender, and so on. Groups in a society can be variously defined. Deutungshoheit, German word for interpretive sovereignty, is hegemonically disputed and in continuous flux. Hoggart, Williams and Hall expand on this classic study of the high culture of the social elite to advocate understanding the diverse ways of life and traditions of the whole of society. Nonetheless, Japan and its culture are often accorded an exception. Its society is ascribed strong homogeneity. This is variously attributed, for example, to its special insular location, intermittent periods of government-enforced isolation, so-called sekoku, closure of the country from 1640 to 1853, or the successful implementation of the teachings of Far Eastern philosophers, in particular Confucius, teacher Kong, I have not pronounced this right, 551 to 479 BC. The question at hand expresses the will of a group, here of the Japanese people or nation, to preserve valued intellectual capital and customs that differentiate their culture and society next to its material artifacts. Institutionalization is the means chosen to achieve the goal of resisting the passage of time. The dissemination of cultural knowledge beyond one's own society is of secondary importance. Certainly, the ear system is not the only method available for the transfer of cultural knowledge. However, it is considered a key Japanese cultural practice. On the other hand, the concept of the stem family, which shares similarities to the ie, is not completely unknown in Europe, as Ochiai emphasizes. An understanding of the Japanese practice and its challenges in the present should be of interest when reflecting on one's own cultural traditions. In relation to the question of robustness of the ear system, let us consider, among other things, 1. What are the origins of the ear system, and how was the concept understood in the Middle Ages by the ruling class? 2. How was the ear system defined as a state institution during the time of empire, i.e. 1868 to 1945? And 3. What was the role of the ear system after the nation's defeat in the Second World War, and how has it been redefined for the present? Using the model of communication developed by Shannon and Weaver, we will, in a second part of the essay, show the limitations of the usual Western method of relying heavily on written sources to access the cultural knowledge of past civilization eras, as well as, in the inverse, to pass on knowledge to future generations. What opportunities do new information technologies offer? And can these replace the ear system as a means of study and practice of Japanese customs, art forms, and cultural traditions? The word ie and the symbol for ie stands for house, i.e. a building used as an abode. In addition, ie has the meaning of family, household, clan, or tribe. According to Hall and Birdsley, in genealogical usage, the word refers to the male hereditary line. I quote, "The ie is a patrilineage, a network of households related through their respective heads, comprising main houses, branch houses, and the branches of branch houses traced down through the generations." Unquote. The concept can be traced back to the family system of the court and the knighthood. The Kojiki, literally the records of ancient matters, from the start of the 8th century, established the divine origins of the emperor and the identity of his people. This served to justify territorial sovereignty and drew a distinction to the cultural influence and power of the Chinese court. Over subsequent centuries, aristocratic families, the ie, meticulously maintained genealogical records to legitimate their claims and status. In 1889, the system was codified and made a mandatory legal practice for all Japanese citizens. However, the corresponding laws were voided by the American occupation forces after the defeat of the empire. The original legal adjuncts created concurrently, the koseki, the family registers, are maintained to this day in modified format. These replace precursors such as the terauke, the birth registers of Buddhist temples, the goningomi cho, the 5 household registers, as well as the shumon nimbetsu aratame cho, religious inquisition registers, for the census of the bakufu, the shogunate. Legal definitions from the time of empire are less relevant to our investigation than the institutional and cultural practice that has entered the Japanese consciousness. Nakane identified a repeated pattern in Japanese society, the tate shakai, i.e. the vertical society. According to the Constitution of 1946, sovereignty is vested in the people. The tenno, literally the heavenly ruler, as a symbol of the state, is not elected. Succession, on the death of the tenno, passes from the father to the son in accordance with the imperial household law of 1889. The 2019 abdication of Akihito in favour of his son Naruhito was arranged under a one-off bill. The law from the Meiji period was left unchanged. Despite Hirohito, who lived from 1901 to 1989, publicly denunciating his divinity on New Year's Day 1946, the tenno still holds a central role in Shinto, the way of the gods belief. Ancestor worship, given the ie, a religious dimension. Family members that have died, but also the unborn successors, are part of a community of souls. It is the duty of the living members to honour these souls, to protect the household from misfortune. The house altar, as well as the ancestral grave, must be maintained. Seasonal rites, such as obon, need to be honoured. To better understand the workings of the Iya system in feudal times, we shall describe its hierarchical structure and patriarchal character. The Iya household is led by the eldest father, the head of the household. Family members must subjugate themselves and are not free to choose, for example, a profession or partner. The head of the household enjoys absolute decision-making authority. He manages material assets and wealth, assigns position and allocates tasks to family members, decides upon succession and inheritance. He holds responsibility and is held accountable for everything that results from interactions with other Iya. Usually, the firstborn son is raised from birth to take over the role of head of the household after the demise of his father. In the case of no natural-born son or the premature death, it was common to adopt a son from another family. At the same time, it was usual for daughters to leave the family and the household through marriage, and for younger sons to establish their own branch family in a house allocated by the head of the household. The primary role of women was to give birth and raise siblings. They were expected to stand by their man in all matters. The other social castes, we're talking about farmers, craftsmen and traders, could not live up to this ideal form of samurai Ie. Following this discourse on traditional Ie understanding, we want to focus on its historical significance in mediating Japanese culture. The ruling class determined what was allowed to pass as high culture, funded and therefore preserved. So it is only natural that the aristocracy used the Ie system of the period as the means for passing down the generation's feudal ways of life and pastime, such as koro, the way of fragrance, sado, the way of tea, the combat sports of bushi, for the samurai, such as kendo, the way of the sword, kyudo, way of the bow, shodo, ways of writing, and so on. One may note that many of these arts are characterized by interaction and movement. Transient in time and hard to conserve, they cannot be experienced by just viewing objects. Up until the present day, certain practices, forms of expression and styles in these disciplines are closely associated with a particular Ie. By way of example, one may consider the different schools of Sado. A particular style or school can be traced back to a master and follows the Ie structure. To be associated by a name with an Ie is a privilege that establishes a personal connection to the school and its art. Other Japanese art forms grew in the Edo period, lasted from 1602 to 1868, from the populistic entertainments of the bourgeoisie and townfolks. For example, sumo, wrestling, which is also associated with Shinto, kabuki, the popular theatre, and ukiyo-e, the pictures of the floating world, or more simply, hanga, woodcuts. Sportsmen, actors and artists are subject to commercial pressure and short-lived trends. Contrary to high culture, it was usual to change your name frequently. However, these individuals from often humble origins mostly had no financial reserves to speak of and no direct market access. For this reason, they arranged themselves with a well-known stable, a producer or publisher, an Ie. In addition, the Ie structure can be found in the management and the networks of Japanese companies that grew from craft businesses and trading houses. Two problematic Ie aspects catch the eye of the modern and emancipated observer: its authoritarian character in general and the patronage of women. The latter essentially excludes half of the creative and economic forces of society from active cultural creation, whereas the former substantially limits the creativity of young people over a long period of apprenticeship, possibly to the extent that an individual's natural curiosity and potential for spontaneous creation diminish. Or, do these considerations miss the true intention to conserve order and authority? Central tenets in the Confucian tradition are not personal freedom and self-directed realization, but adjusting the individual to secure the success of the social collective. The adaptation of the ear system to a modern society therefore needs to be reflected. The Civil Code of 1947 grants equal rights to husband and wife. Marriage and separation require only the consent of the partners. Inheritance is shared amongst the descendants. In the post-war period, Japan experienced a tremendous economic revival, stifled only by the implosion of the bubble economy towards the end of the 1980s. Political and economic developments went hand in hand with social change. The trend towards urbanization remains unbroken. In 2019, 92% of people lived in urban cities. Characteristic for the Heisei period, which is from 1989 to 2019, are the aging society, the decline in marriages and births, as well as the gradual emancipation of women in the workplace. Consequently, the most common family format today is the nuclear family, with and especially without children. Three-generation households living under one roof are found less and less, even outside of the urban centres. In 2013, 25% of married couples lived in the house of just one of the parents. In 1920 it was 56%. The portion co-residing in the wife's parents' household has increased from the marriage court 1920s of 1 to 5, or 1 in 5, in the 1960s it was 1 in 3. Families members living separately enjoy more autonomy, leading to greater individualism. Nakane advocated in 1972 to hold on to the socially beneficial aspects of the ear. I quote, "It is generally believed that as a consequence of modernization, particularly the enforcement of the post-war constitution, the ear institution no longer exists. This viewpoint looks at the ear from an ideological angle that links it in particular with feudal moral concepts, and does not give sufficient consideration to its fundamental structure as a social group." Unquote. In the form of communities of purpose, individuals could come together in a certain locality to effectively manage assets in the interest of society. Examples are the tenant community of a shared house, rural cooperatives, and communal administration. The same realization should be transferable to the traditional schools for the transfer of cultural knowledge. These would emerge strengthened, since there would be no disconnect to the legal practice and way of life of its contemporary members. While it would surely be productive to analyse actual examples of such realization, this goes beyond the scope of the current essay. Instead, we will turn to a different challenge. The survival of the ear, like every system, is tied to the survival of the fundamental social order. After all, with regards to Japan, one refers not to the Meiji Revolution, but to the Meiji Ishin, the Meiji modernization or restoration. By way of an extreme alternative example, we may think of the forceful elimination of a civilization, such as it occurred in Middle and South America at the beginning of the 16th century. Cultural knowledge transfer based solely on the ear would hardly survive the slaughter of the social elite, the enslavement of the populace, widespread death from the imported pandemics. At this point, we should relativize that the conquistadors, in their religious fervor, simultaneously destroyed countless written records and art objects of the defeated civilization, ensuring that even these carriers of knowledge were lost for posterity. Are there alternative, better methods to secure the transfer of cultural knowledge? The model developed by Shannon and Weaver for the telecommunications industry may be generalized to the transfer of knowledge. In contrast to an ear, sender and receiver do not reside in the same location. Nonetheless, the objective is the complete and error-free transmission of information and knowledge. Amongst other things, this requires robust encoding and decoding. Sender and receiver need to possess the keys to or share a lexicon of the transmission's cipher. the model explicitly accounts for the possibility of interference in order to compare the quality of different systems of transmission. Quality depends on many factors, but for reliable communication it is particularly important to minimize the risk and impact of uncontrollable circumstances and of chance. In passing, we may note that in the case of human interactions, chance and misunderstanding can be particularly potent sources of inspiration and innovation, even when the price to pay is a large number of suboptimal results. Could the model of temporarily synchronous communications just described, i.e. where the sender and receiver are present at the same time, if not in the same place, be modified for a temporarily asynchronous transfer? This would require intermediary storage of information, of knowledge. Verification not just of the receipt of the message, but of the recipient's correct understanding by reversal of the information flow would be difficult or even impossible if the sender is not in the position to receive at that particular time, for example, because he or she has deceased or is deceased. The dilemma is well known to the field of historical research. Here one refers principally to the written sources, since these are considered authentic, direct, and reliable, in contrast to the knowledge passed down the generations in handshake fashion by word of mouth and ritualistic practice. However, until recent times, the written medium was only accessible to a small, privileged group of society. Cultural knowledge gleaned solely from written sources is therefore prone to a lack of diversity and bandwidth. Hence, a conscientious researcher also looks for physical evidence, such as from excavations and visualizations of ruins, graves, and artifacts. As a scientist, he or she has an interest to develop an objective and comprehensive understanding of his or her subject matter. She or he marks uncertainties and gaps in knowledge. A direct conversation with the historian, the recipient, and the source sender is not possible, as in the asynchronous model of communication. However, the recipient is aware that information, in most cases not intended for him or her, can be misunderstood outside of its original cultural context and coding. The author-sender can hardly predict every possible setting of every possible recipient. But to interpret symbols, words, and images across cultures, it is necessary to fall back on a common, timeless understanding of life and of one's senses. Moreover, the intention of the sender is often not the same as that of the recipient. Said claims Western anthropologists are institutionally prevented, due to being forced to reference authoritative predecessors of their own culture to carry the argument, from developing a true understanding of foreign cultures, and instead end up justifying the imperial superiority of their own culture. The ear system can respond to this. Human representatives on a culture stand in their tradition, but also in the time of the anthropologist. They are available for live discourse. They do not need second-hand interpretation, can take issue with misrepresentations. One might add that cultural forms such as the Japanese tea ceremony live in the moment and need to be experienced. They are inseparable from human interaction and rely heavily on the senses. In this case, they are hard to preserve the sense to taste. On the other hand, traditional cultural forms are characterized by rigid formalisms. Their effect should be perfectly repeatable time and time again. Only in this way can the degeneration of orally or ritually transmitted knowledge be contained. In any case, the moment in which cultural knowledge is presented to an audience or customer is usually separate from the time in which the knowledge was acquired through rote learning, meticulous practice, and imitation. So has the ear system become redundant in view of modern technological innovations? Digitalization offers new possibilities for the capture, intermittent storage, and presentation of knowledge. However, this cannot guarantee the correct assimilation of cultural knowledge, nor perfection through time-intensive involvement. In addition to knowledge access, cultural transfer requires facilitation, animation, and moderation. In short, a school. Cultural offerings can these days be disseminated virtually across the world using multiple channels. Anyone can consume and comment at the touch of a button. This cultural pluralism is global, populistic, and commercial. Cultural understanding, however, is subjective. One culture's profound ritual may appear primitive, even ridiculous to an observer from another culture. We require background knowledge, cultural grounding, acclimatization, schooling. Institutional recognition of knowledge as a cultural accords to the master prestige and honor. Material reward is a lesser motivator. Since the 1950s, Japan awards the title of Ningen Kokuho, i.e. human national jewel, to the worthy individuals. Deutungshoheit, German word for what is allowed to pass in a society as culturally wholesome, as well as who is allowed to communicate such cultural knowledge, remains hegemonic, of hegemonic significance. So let's return, to wrap up, to the questions we originally set out to answer. Yes, the EAR system has shown itself robust and adaptable at ensuring the transfer of cultural knowledge. The EAR structure has proven itself, and there is sufficient evidence that as a Japanese system is institutionally anchored and serving its purpose as a guarantor, and will continue to do so in future, as long as social order can be maintained. Western historical and cultural research relies strongly on the written word and the study of physical objects, but many traditional forms of culture and art have transient properties that are hard to pin down and fully comprehend in this way. The general challenges of asynchronous knowledge transfer were illustrated using the model of communication developed by Shannon and Weaver. New technologies offer increased possibilities for self-motivated cultural knowledge access, but cannot replace the context, structure, humanity, and the moment of reciprocal interaction using all the senses between teacher and pupil, artist and audience. Thank you.